If you can't let them go, watch this. Carl Jung observed that the hardest people to release are rarely the people themselves, but the images we have quietly hung upon them. As Jung wrote, in a passage from his collected works on the archetypes, in each of us there is another whom we do not know, and it is this stranger inside who calls to us across a crowded room, who fills a face with a light. That face did not put there itself, and so when you sit alone at night replaying a voice, a smell, a way someone said your name, you are not only grieving a person, you are grieving the moment your own hidden other went quiet. And that ache, however it feels, is not proof that the bond was fate. It is proof that something in you has not yet been asked to come home. Before we go further, if this kind of teaching helps you see your own story more clearly, consider staying close by subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you too. And if any part of this is landing in your chest right now, type the 2 words, "let go" in the comments. Just those 2 words, so I know you are still here with me. The first key is this. What you cannot let go of is very often not the human being at all. It is the inner figure that human being was, for a while, wearing. Jung called this inner figure the Anima in a man and the Animus in a woman, a soul image carried in the unconscious from the very beginning of a life, and when someone walks by who fits the shape of that inner figure closely enough, the image leaps outward and lands on them. So the glow you feel is not coming from across the room, it is coming from inside you, thrown outward like a lantern beam, and landing, for a while, on a face that seemed to hold it perfectly. This is why losing that person can feel like losing a limb, or a season, or the ground itself, because in some sense you were not just losing them, you were losing the place where a part of your own psyche had been allowed, for the first time, to stand in the light. So before you call this love gone wrong, or bad luck, or a wound that will never close, sit with the possibility that grief this large is telling you something about your own depths, not only about the one who left. So here is a quiet resolution to carry from this first key. I will ask what part of myself I have been mourning. I will ask what part of myself I have been mourning. The second key is that this inner figure is not a metaphor. Jung treated it as one of the most powerful forces in the whole of the psyche. He wrote that the anima is the archetype of life itself, and by that he meant it is not a symptom, or a fantasy, or a trick of loneliness. It is a living structure inherited across the whole of human history, the same way the instinct to fear the dark is inherited, or the instinct to comfort a crying child. This means the pull you feel toward the one you cannot release is not shallow, it is ancient. It is the same pull that has driven poems and wars and pilgrimages for as long as there have been people to feel it. So you do not need to be ashamed of the size of the longing. The longing is old, and it is real. But here is the turn inside this key. The archetype gives the pull its force, but it is the person who gives the pull its face. And those are 2 different things. The force belongs to you. It was always yours. It lived in you before you ever met them, and it will go on living in you after. It is only the face that belonged, for a season, to someone else. Imagine a man who cannot stop thinking of a woman he barely knew for 6 months. He tells himself it was destiny. He tells himself no one will ever match her again. And what he does not yet see is that he is not missing her exactly. He is missing the aliveness that arrived in him the day his own inner figure found, for a while, somewhere to stand. And imagine too a woman who keeps returning, in memory, to a man who was often absent, who rarely answered when she needed him, and yet she cannot explain why her chest still tightens at his name. She is not foolish, and she is not weak. She is simply feeling the old current of an inherited figure that arrived long before he did, and will still be there long after he is gone from her life entirely. This is worth sitting with slowly, because most people spend years trying to find the right face to finally quiet this current, as though the ache itself were the problem to be solved by the correct person. When the ache is not a problem at all, it is the oldest part of you asking to be recognized, and no outer person, however devoted, can do that recognizing for you. This is not a small distinction. It is the difference between spending a life searching for someone to complete you, and slowly learning to meet what is already alive and waiting inside your own depths. So the resolution for this key is quiet but firm. I will honor the force without confusing it for the face. I will honor the force without confusing it for the face. The third key is the mechanism itself. How does an inner image end up glued so tightly to an outer person that losing them feels like losing your own skin? Jung named the pairing between the inner figure and an outer person a kind of syzygy, an old word for two things yoked together. And he wrote plainly that this inner image is, as a rule, unconsciously projected upon the person of the beloved, and is one of the chief reasons for passionate attraction or aversion. Notice, he says, attraction or aversion in the same breath, because the same mechanism that makes you unable to look away from someone can just as easily make you unable to forgive them. This is why the person you cannot let go of is so often the same person who, in a different season, seemed to hold everything you needed, until they didn't. Projection does not care whether the outcome is bliss or wreckage. It only cares that the inner image found a hook to hang itself on, and once it is hanging there, the ordinary human being underneath starts to disappear beneath the glow. You stop seeing their tiredness, their small selfishness, their very human limits. You see instead a shining completion of yourself. And this is why breakups involving deep projection do not feel like losing a friend. They feel like amputation, because in your felt experience, you were not two separate people. You were, for a while, one completed thing. Imagine a woman who meets a man at a friend's wedding. He says almost nothing remarkable that night, and yet she cannot stop thinking of the way he listened, the way his silence felt like understanding rather than distance. Within weeks, she is certain she has never been so known by anyone. And what she does not see, because projection never announces itself, is that the listening she felt was not entirely coming from him. Part of it was her own inner figure, quiet and unspoken for years, finally finding a face still enough to receive it. This does not mean the man was nothing. It means he was, for a while, a screen as well as a person, both things at once. And this is worth sitting with plainly, because most people assume projection means the feeling was false. It was not false. The warmth was real. The ache is real now. What was borrowed was only the certainty that this particular face was the sole source of it. So ask yourself honestly this week, when you remember them, are you remembering their actual habits, their actual voice on a dull Tuesday, or are you remembering a feeling that arrived through them, but was never, strictly speaking, about them at all? This is not a comfortable question, and Jung never pretended these questions were comfortable, but comfort was never his aim. Clarity was. So here is the resolution for this key. I will look for the hook in myself before I mourn the hand that held it. I will look for the hook in myself before I mourn the hand that held it. The fourth key turns the lantern toward you directly, because until now we have been speaking of people in general, the ones who cannot release a lost love, the ones who replay a voice at midnight. But now consider your own private history a little more closely. Has this happened before? Not this exact person, but this exact shape of person. Imagine someone who has loved 3 times in a decade, and each time, when the story is laid flat and looked at plainly, the same pattern appears, the same kind of unavailable warmth, the same kind of charming distance, the same quiet cruelty wrapped in the same tender opening scene. This is not bad luck repeating itself by accident. Jung would say this is the same inner figure, wearing different clothing, being sent out again and again to find the same kind of hook. Because the unconscious does not learn the way the conscious mind learns. It does not read a lesson once and move on. It repeats the pattern until the pattern is finally seen and made conscious. Picture a woman who swears, after each ending, that this time was different, that this one truly saw her, and yet a friend who has known her for 20 years could draw the same shape on paper each time. A man who arrives warm and certain, who slowly grows distant the moment she leans on him, who leaves her explaining his absence to herself long after he has stopped explaining anything at all. She is not choosing badly out of foolishness. She is answering a call she cannot yet hear clearly, the call of an old unmet need, dressed up as a new romance. And this is the part that asks real honesty of you. Because the pattern rarely announces itself in the moment, it only shows itself afterward, in the cold light of the third or fourth repetition, when the excuses you gave the first time no longer explain the fifth. So this week, without judgment, without the cruelty of self-blame, simply lay your own history flat in front of you, like photographs on a table. Not only romance, look also at friendships that turned the same corner, at jobs that disappointed you in the same particular way, at every door that seemed new and somehow led back to the same room. Ask what recurs. Is it the same kind of silence you keep falling toward? The same kind of promise that is never quite kept? The same kind of person who makes you feel chosen and then makes you feel forgotten? If you find a pattern, you have not found a flaw in your character. You have found a piece of your own unconscious that has been trying, in its own blunt language, to get your attention for years. A pattern is not a curse written into you. It is closer to a letter sent again and again, because the first 10 were never opened. This is the moment the video quietly stops being about them and starts being about you, not as blame, but as an invitation. Because the one thing a repeating pattern cannot do is fix itself while it remains unconscious. It can only keep repeating, exactly as Jung warned when he wrote that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. So the resolution for this key is this: I will look for the pattern before I look for someone new. I will look for the pattern before I look for someone new. The fifth key is the part almost no one wants to hear, because it says the very falling apart you are grieving may have been the relationship finally becoming real. Jung recalled in his memoirs a moment with his own wife, late in her life, when the early enchantment between them had long since faded into something plainer, and when asked about it, he said simply, "It is art," meaning the early glow was never the whole of the relationship. It was only the opening scene, the part lit by projection, and what came after, the plainer years, the ordinary years, were not a falling away from love. They were the beginning of something that finally deserved the name. This is almost the exact opposite of what our culture teaches about heartbreak. We are taught that the glow fading means the love was fake, or wasted, or a mistake. But Jung taught something far less flattering to our fantasies, and far more useful to our actual lives. He taught that disillusionment, the literal losing of an illusion, is not the death of a relationship. It is the doorway into one. And notice the word itself. Illusion. It does not mean the arrival of something false. It means the departure of something false, which is a very different event than the one grief usually tells you it is. Think of the early weeks with someone you have loved, the way their laugh seemed to solve something in you, the way their absence felt unbearable within hours. That intensity was never really about who they were as a full, tired, complicated, particular human being. It was your own inner figure, shining through them like a lamp through a paper screen, and at some point, sometimes gently and sometimes with real pain, the paper tears, and you see the actual person standing there, smaller than the myth, more limited than the myth, but also, and this is the quiet miracle Jung pointed to, more real than the myth ever was. Imagine a woman who remembers, with a kind of hunger, the first months with a man she once loved, the long drives, the messages at midnight, the sense that he alone understood her completely, and she compares those months against the later, quieter years that came after, the two of them making coffee in silence on a Tuesday, half listening to the radio, no longer finishing each other's sentences, and she quietly decides that whatever they had must have died somewhere in between. But Jung would ask her to look again at that ordinary kitchen, because it may not be a graveyard at all. It may be the very room where love, stripped finally of its borrowed light, was only just beginning to be possible. The silence of that Tuesday is not the absence of feeling. It may be two actual people, seen plainly, choosing each other without the help of any glow at all. And that, Jung would say, is a far rarer thing than the midnight messages ever were. So if what you are grieving right now is the loss of that early glow, Ask yourself honestly whether what ended was the person, or whether what ended was simply the projection. And if it was the projection, there is real grief in that. Do not let anyone rush you past it. The grief is not fake, merely because its object was partly imagined. A lantern is still warm while it burns, even if you later learn you were the one holding it. But there is also, hidden inside the grief, an invitation to eventually love something plainer and truer, either with this person if the door is somehow still open, or with the next one, this time with your eyes further open than before. So the resolution for this key is this: I will grieve the glow honestly, and let it teach me what real love asks for. I will grieve the glow honestly, and let it teach me what real love asks for. The sixth key is the practical turning, the actual work of withdrawing a projection. Because Jung never taught this simply as an idea to admire from a safe distance. He taught it as something a person actually does, slowly, over time, with real discomfort along the way. And he was honest that it requires what he called considerable moral effort, meaning it is not a single insight that fixes everything in an evening. It is a discipline. Practice the way a person practices anything worth doing badly at first. Withdrawal begins with noticing. So take a quiet evening this week and write down, without performing for anyone, what exactly you cannot release about this person. Is it their voice? Is it the way they made you feel understood without needing to explain yourself? Is it a particular safety, a particular excitement, a particular sense of being chosen? Write each one down plainly, and then ask, quietly and honestly, where did I feel this exact thing before I ever met them? Sometimes the answer reaches back to a parent, sometimes to an old friendship, sometimes to a hope you have carried since childhood that someone would finally see you fully. Imagine a woman who keeps an old shirt of her former partner folded in a drawer. She tells herself she keeps it for the smell, for the memory of one particular evening. But if she is honest with herself late at night, what she is really keeping is the feeling of being the most important person in a room, a feeling she first lost, long before this relationship, in a much smaller and much older room. The shirt is not the thing she cannot release. The shirt is only where the feeling happened to land. This is not an exercise to shame the person you loved, and it is not an exercise to erase the reality of what passed between you. Real tenderness can exist alongside projection. The two are not enemies, but the exercise exists to separate what belonged to them from what belonged only to you, so that the part which belongs to you can be carried home again, rather than left behind in a house that is no longer yours to enter. Notice, too, that this work will meet resistance in you. Some quiet voice will insist that naming the projection cheapens the love, that calling it partly your own inner figure makes the whole thing less real. This is the ego protecting its story, because the ego would often rather keep an old wound dressed up as fate than admit a piece of it was always within reach. So when that resistance rises, do not fight it. Simply notice it too. Write it down alongside everything else. As the inventory grows, something begins to shift. The person in your memory starts to become a person again, rather than a myth. Their faults return to view. Their limits return to view. The particular way they went quiet when you needed words. The particular way they promised more than they gave. Strangely, this does not make the loss smaller, but it does make it survivable. Because you are no longer only grieving a completed half of yourself walking away, you are grieving an ordinary human being, which is a loss any person can eventually carry, and carrying it is different from being flattened by it. So this week, do the quiet work of the inventory, not to stop feeling, but to finally feel the truth of what happened, rather than only the shine of what you wished had happened. And know that every gram of longing you correctly trace back to yourself is a gram of your own light returned to your own hands, which no leaving and no loss can ever again take from you. So the resolution for this final key is this: I will carry my own light home, and love, next time, with my eyes open. I will carry my own light home, and love, next time, with my eyes open. Here is the whole picture. What you cannot release is often an inner figure wearing a borrowed face. The pull you feel is ancient and real, even when the face was temporary. The hook that holds the image belongs to you before it ever belonged to them. The pattern that keeps repeating is your unconscious asking to finally be seen. The fading of the glow is not the end of love, but very often its true beginning. And the slow work of withdrawal is how the lantern finally comes home to the hands that were always meant to carry it. None of this asks you to stop loving or to pretend the grief was small. It only asks you to notice where the light was truly coming from all along. If you can't let them go yet, that is not a failure. It may simply mean the light has not yet found its way back to you.